The morning mist hung heavy over Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood by the tall windows of her private study. Her fingers traced the condensation on the glass as she watched the groundskeepers tend to the autumn gardens below. The golden leaves danced in the crisp October breeze, creating a carpet of amber and rust beneath the ancient oak trees that had witnessed centuries of royal history. It had been 3 weeks since William departed for his extended royal tour across the Commonwealth nations. What was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission had stretched longer than anticipated due to unexpected political developments in several countries. Catherine understood the importance of his work, but the weight of managing their royal duties alone, caring for their 3 children, and maintaining public appearances had begun to take its toll. George, now 11, had been asking every evening when Papa would return home. Charlotte, 9, had grown quieter than usual, often found sketching pictures of their family with an empty space where William should be. Little Louis, only 5, would run to the window each time he heard helicopter rotors, hoping it was his father returning from yet another official engagement. Catherine had managed to maintain her composed public facade during the school visits, charity galas, and official ceremonies that filled her schedule. The media praised her grace under pressure, her ability to carry on the royal duties with such dignity. But behind closed doors, in the quiet moments between her public obligations, the loneliness crept in like shadows at dusk. She picked up her phone for the 3rd time that morning, checking for any messages from William. The time difference made communication challenging, and his packed itinerary left little room for personal calls. Their last conversation had been brief, interrupted by urgent matters requiring his immediate attention. She understood, of course, but understanding didn't make the separation any easier. The sound of small footsteps echoed through the corridor outside her study. Louis appeared in the doorway, still wearing his pajamas, his hair tousled from sleep. His bright blue eyes, so reminiscent of his father's, looked up at her with a mixture of hope and confusion. "Mummy, is Papa coming home today?" he asked, clutching his favorite stuffed lion that William had given him before departing. Catherine's heart clenched as she knelt down to Louis's level, smoothing his unruly hair with gentle fingers. "Not today, darling, but very soon," she replied, forcing brightness into her voice that she didn't quite feel. "He's doing very important work, helping people in faraway places." Louis nodded solemnly, though she could see the disappointment in his young face. "Can we call him? I want to tell him about my drawing from yesterday." "We'll try later when he's not in meetings," Catherine promised, pulling him into a warm embrace. The scent of his apple-scented shampoo brought tears to her eyes, reminding her of the countless bedtime routines William was missing, the stories left unread, the good-night kisses that fell to her alone to give. As Louis scampered back to his room to get dressed for breakfast, Catherine returned to the window. The palace staff moved about their duties with practiced efficiency, but she noticed how they, too, seemed affected by William's absence. The security teams maintained their vigilance, but there was a different energy when the future king was away. Even the corgis seemed restless, occasionally wandering to William's study and lying by his empty chair. Her private secretary knocked gently on the door frame. "Your Royal Highness, you have the Education Summit at 10, followed by the Children's Hospital visit this afternoon. The car will be ready in 45 minutes. Catherine nodded, straightening her shoulders. "Thank you, Sarah. Has there been any update on His Royal Highness's schedule?" The last communication indicated he would remain in Australia for at least another week. The climate conference has been extended due to the urgency of the negotiations. Another week. Catherine felt the familiar tightness in her chest, but maintained her composed expression. "Of course. Please ensure the children's tutors know I'll be back by 4 for their piano lessons." After Sarah left, Catherine allowed herself one moment of vulnerability. She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass and closed her eyes. When she was Lady Catherine Middleton, before the titles and the protocol, before the weight of royal responsibility settled on her shoulders, She never imagined how the privilege would sometimes feel like a beautiful cage. The isolation wasn't just about William's absence. It was the knowledge that their life together would always belong partially to the nation, that personal desires would often be secondary to duty. She thought about ordinary couples who could express their longing freely, who could complain about work separations without it becoming headline news, who could show their struggles without it being interpreted as weakness in the royal institution. She opened her eyes and gazed across the London skyline, where millions of people were starting their daily routines, many dealing with their own separations and challenges. The thought grounded her, reminding her that loneliness was a human experience, not unique to royalty. Yet knowing this didn't diminish the ache she felt for her husband's presence, for the way he would wrap his arms around her waist while she prepared morning tea, for his terrible jokes that made her laugh despite herself. Catherine moved to her dressing room and selected a navy blue dress suit, appropriate for her morning engagement. As she applied her makeup with practiced precision, she caught her reflection's eyes in the mirror. The public would see the Duchess of Cambridge, poised and radiant. They wouldn't see the wife who slept clutching her husband's pillow, who saved funny moments from her day to share with him later, who worried about the strain his packed schedule placed on his health and spirits. George appeared at her door, already dressed in his school uniform, his hair neatly combed. At 11, he was beginning to understand the weight of royal duty, the sacrifices that came with their position. He had his father's thoughtful nature and often seemed older than his years. "Mummy, you look lovely," he said with the earnestness that made her heart swell with pride and sadness in equal measure. "Thank you, darling. Are you ready for school?" George nodded, then hesitated. "Will you be all right today? You seem different when Papa's away." Catherine was struck by her eldest child's perceptiveness. She sat on the edge of her bed and patted the space beside her. George joined her, his young face serious with concern. "I miss him too," she said honestly. "It's natural to feel sad when people we love are far away. But we're strong, and we take care of each other until he comes home." "Like a team," George said, understanding lighting his eyes. "Exactly like a team." Catherine kissed his forehead, drawing strength from his resilience. "Now, let's go have breakfast with Charlotte and Louis. I think Cook has made those blueberry pancakes you all love." As they walked together toward the family dining room, Catherine felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her children needed her to be strong, not just for the public, but for them. They were navigating this unusual life together, learning to balance their roles as both royals and family members. The breakfast table buzzed with typical childhood chatter. Charlotte showed everyone her latest artwork, a detailed drawing of the family dog, Orla, chasing butterflies in the palace gardens. Louis regaled them with stories from his swimming lessons, complete with dramatic reenactments that made them all laugh. For a moment, the absence at the head of the table seemed less pronounced. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart leaped, hoping it was from William, but it was her mother, Carol, checking on how she was managing. The support from her family had been unwavering throughout her royal journey, a constant source of comfort and normalcy in a life that was anything but ordinary. After breakfast, she kissed each child goodbye, promising to hear all about their day when they returned from school. As her car pulled away from Kensington Palace, Catherine watched the familiar grounds disappear behind them. The morning sun had burned off the mist, revealing a crisp, beautiful day that somehow made William's absence feel more acute. During the drive to her first engagement, Catherine reflected on the conversation she'd had with Queen Elizabeth years earlier, when her relationship with William was becoming serious. The late Queen had spoken about the unique challenges faced by royal spouses, the delicate balance between personal happiness and public duty, the strength required to support someone whose first loyalty would always be to the crown. At the time, Catherine had nodded respectfully, believing she understood. But understanding in theory and living the reality were vastly different experiences. The Queen's words echoed in her mind. "Love in our family requires patience, resilience, and an unshakable faith in each other and the institution we serve. The education summit proceeded smoothly, with Catherine engaging thoughtfully in discussions about early childhood development and mental health resources in schools. Her genuine passion for these causes shone through, and she felt the familiar satisfaction that came from meaningful work. The event organizers were effusive in their gratitude, praising her insights and dedication. But during a brief break between sessions, Catherine found herself checking her phone again, hoping for word from William. The last she'd heard, his meetings with Australian government officials had run late into the previous evening. The weight of climate negotiations, trade agreements, and diplomatic protocols consumed his days, leaving little time for personal matters. She understood the importance of his work. Climate change affected every corner of the Commonwealth, and William's environmental advocacy had become one of his defining causes. The Earthshot Prize had gained international recognition, and his influence in these critical negotiations could have lasting impact for future generations, including their own children. Yet understanding didn't ease the longing to share these moments of her day with him, to hear his voice before she fell asleep, to have his steady presence beside her as they navigated the challenges of raising their children in the public eye. As Catherine prepared for her afternoon visit to the Children's Hospital, she reminded herself that thousands of families dealt with similar separations. Military families, business executives, medical professionals. Many people made sacrifices for work that served a greater good. Her situation was unique in its public nature, but the emotional challenges were universally human. The hospital visit proved to be exactly what her heart needed. Meeting with young patients and their families, witnessing the incredible resilience of children facing serious health challenges, reminded Catherine of the privilege inherent in her position. These families drew strength from her presence, from the attention their cause received through her advocacy. One little girl, no older than Charlotte, was recovering from a complex surgery. She'd prepared a drawing for Catherine, a colorful picture of a princess helping sick children feel better. The child's eyes sparkled with excitement as she presented her gift, and Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "This is absolutely beautiful," Catherine said, kneeling beside the girl's bed. "You're incredibly talented. What's your favorite color to use when you draw?" "Purple," the girl replied without hesitation. "My mummy says purple is the color of brave people." Catherine smiled, thinking of her own daughter's love for art, her fearless use of bold colors, and imaginative subjects. "Your mummy is very wise. Purple is definitely a brave color." As they chatted about art and favorite books, Catherine found herself genuinely present in the moment, her worries about William temporarily set aside. This little girl and her family were dealing with challenges far greater than a temporary separation, yet they radiated hope and determination. The afternoon flew by as Catherine moved from room to room, spending time with each child and family. She learned about treatment plans, heard stories of progress and setbacks, and marveled at the dedication of the medical staff who worked tirelessly to provide the best possible care. As she prepared to leave, the hospital's chief executive pulled her aside. "Your Royal Highness, I cannot express how much these visits mean to our families. You bring light into some very difficult days." Catherine was touched by the sincerity in his voice. "These children and families inspire me far more than I could ever inspire them. Their courage in the face of such challenges humbles me completely." During the drive back to Kensington Palace, Catherine reflected on the day's experiences. The Education Summit had reinforced her commitment to early childhood development initiatives, while the hospital visit reminded her of the real impact their royal work could have on individual lives. William would be proud of what she'd accomplished in his absence, she knew. As her car approached the palace gates, Catherine felt a familiar mix of anticipation and disappointment. Part of her always hoped to find William waiting in their private apartments, having returned early from his tour. But the rational part of her mind knew that important negotiations couldn't be rushed, that his presence was needed where he was. The children would be home from school soon, full of stories and energy that would fill the quiet spaces in their home. This evening routine had become precious to Catherine during William's absence. The homework help, the shared dinner, the bedtime stories that stretched longer than usual as she tried to fill both parental roles. As Catherine entered their private wing of the palace, she paused in William's study. His desk remained exactly as he'd left it, with a half-finished letter to one of his charitable organizations and a framed photo of their family from their last vacation to Scotland. The room still carried a faint trace of his cologne, and Catherine found herself missing even the mundane aspects of their shared daily life. His coffee cup left on his nightstand, his shoes kicked off carelessly by the bedroom door, the way he hummed unconsciously while reading. These are the details that the public never saw, the ordinary moments that made their extraordinary life feel real and grounded. Without them, Catherine sometimes felt like she was playing a role rather than living her life, performing the duties of a princess while her heart remained focused on simply being a wife and mother. Her phone rang, startling her from her reverie. For a moment, her pulse quickened with hope, but it was her private secretary with updates about tomorrow's schedule. As they discussed logistical details and timing changes, Catherine moved through the apartment, unconsciously straightening pillows and organizing magazines, small acts of control in a life that often felt directed by forces beyond her influence. After the call ended, Catherine stood in their bedroom, looking at the large bed that seemed too empty without William's presence. She thought about calling her mother or sister for company, but the children would be home soon, and she wanted to be fully present for their return. The sound of voices in the corridor announced the arrival of George, Charlotte, and Louis, accompanied by their protection officers. Catherine smiled genuinely for the first time all day as she heard Charlotte's animated description of a science experiment and Louis's excited chatter about a new friend he'd made at school. "Mummy," Louis called out as he burst through the door, his school bag dragging behind him. "We built a volcano today, and it exploded with bubbles everywhere." Catherine knelt down to receive his enthusiastic hug, breathing in the familiar scent of school, a mixture of playground dust, cafeteria meals, and childhood excitement. These moments anchored her, reminding her that regardless of titles and public duties, she was first and foremost their mother. George and Charlotte followed more sedately, but their faces lit up when they saw her. The family gathered in the sitting room, and Catherine listened intently as each child shared the highlights of their day. Their stories painted vivid pictures of ordinary childhood experiences that seemed especially precious in their unique circumstances. As evening approached and the children settled into their homework routines, Catherine finally allowed herself to check her phone properly for the first time since morning. There was a brief message from William, sent hours earlier due to the time difference. "Long day of meetings, but thinking of you and the children constantly. Give them extra hugs from Papa. Love you more than words can express." Catherine read the message 3 times, her fingers tracing the words on the screen. It wasn't much, but it was connection, evidence that despite the physical distance and packed schedules, they remained bound by love and commitment that transcended their current separation. The following morning brought unexpected news that would change everything. Catherine was reviewing briefing notes for an upcoming mental health conference when her private secretary, Sarah, appeared in the doorway with an expression that immediately caught her attention. "Your Royal Highness, I've just received word from the Prince's office in Australia. There's been a development regarding his tour schedule." Catherine set down her papers, her heart beginning to race. The formal tone in Sarah's voice could indicate either very good news or concerning developments. In their world, unexpected changes to royal schedules often meant security issues, political crises, or family emergencies. "What kind of development?" Catherine asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The climate negotiations concluded earlier than anticipated. The participating nations reached a breakthrough agreement late yesterday evening, Australian time. His Royal Highness is no longer needed for the extended sessions. Catherine felt a flutter of hope, but remained cautious. Royal tours were complex operations involving multiple countries, extensive security arrangements, and diplomatic protocols. Even when circumstances changed, departing early wasn't always possible. "Does this mean?" she began, hardly daring to voice the question. Sarah smiled, the first genuine expression of joy Catherine had seen from her usually reserved secretary in weeks. "His Royal Highness is coming home, ma'am. His flight departed Sydney an hour ago. He should arrive at Heathrow tomorrow evening, a full week ahead of the original schedule." Catherine felt her composure slip for just a moment, her hand flying to her chest as relief and excitement flooded through her. Then, the practical considerations began racing through her mind. Security arrangements, the children's schedules, her own official commitments, the media attention that William's early return would inevitably generate. "Has this information been released to the press?" she asked. "Not yet. His Royal Highness specifically requested that his early return be kept private until he arrives. He wants to surprise the children, and he was hoping you might be able to arrange for a quiet family evening tomorrow." Catherine's mind immediately began reorganizing the next day's plans. She had a morning engagement at a women's shelter and an afternoon meeting with her patronage committees, but these could potentially be rescheduled. The children had school, but perhaps they could leave slightly early for a family reunion. More importantly, she wanted to create the perfect homecoming for William. The past 3 weeks have been challenging not just for her and the children, but she knew from their brief phone conversations that he too had felt the strain of the separation. His work was important and fulfilling, but being away from family for extended periods took its toll on everyone. "Please contact the children's school and arrange for early dismissal tomorrow," Catherine instructed. "Nothing dramatic, just mention a family commitment. And see if we can reschedule my afternoon meetings. I'll handle the morning engagement as planned." As Sarah left to make the arrangements, Catherine found herself pacing the study, energy and excitement coursing through her that she hadn't felt in weeks. William was coming home. The phrase repeated in her mind like a prayer answered. She immediately thought about the children's reactions. George had been trying so hard to be the man of the house in his father's absence, taking on responsibilities beyond his years and worrying about both his mother and siblings. Charlotte had channeled her emotions into her artwork, creating numerous drawings of their family that she'd carefully saved to show Papa when he returned. Louis had simply missed his father with the pure, uncomplicated longing of a 5-year-old. Catherine decided to keep the news secret until William actually arrived. She wanted to preserve the magic of a genuine surprise, to see their faces light up with joy when they realized Papa was truly home. She could imagine Louis's squeal of delight, Charlotte's artistic eye already planning how to capture the moment in her next drawing, George's relief at no longer carrying the weight of being the family's only male presence. The rest of the day passed in a blur of barely contained excitement. Catherine moved through her scheduled appointments with professional grace, but internally, she felt like a schoolgirl with a wonderful secret. During her visit to a literacy program, she found herself watching the children read stories about families and adventures, thinking about how soon she would be reading bedtime stories to her own children with William beside her once again. That evening, as she tucked each child in a bed, Catherine had to exercise tremendous self-control to keep from revealing the surprise. Louis, in particular, seemed to sense something different about her mood. "Mummy, you seem happy tonight," he observed with the straightforward honesty that only young children possess. "Happier than you've been." Catherine smoothed his hair and kissed his forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of his bubble bath. "I'm always happy when I'm with you and George and Charlotte," she said truthfully. "You 3 are my greatest joy." "But you miss Papa," Charlotte added from her doorway, where she'd appeared in her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Yes, darling, I miss Papa very much. We all do. But missing someone we love just shows how much they mean to us." George appeared behind Charlotte, and Catherine marveled at how her three children seemed to have developed an unspoken agreement to provide comfort and support during their father's absence. They'd grown closer, more protective of each other, and more aware of emotional undercurrents in their home. "Come on, everyone in Lewis's room for a proper good night," Catherine said, making a spontaneous decision. The four of them crowded onto Lewis's small bed, and Catherine told them a story about a brave knight who traveled to distant lands to help people, always carrying the love of his family in his heart to guide him home. As the children finally settled into their respective rooms for sleep, Catherine found herself unable to contain her nervous energy. She wandered through their apartment, unconsciously preparing for William's return. She arranged fresh flowers in his study, ensuring his favorite books were prominently displayed. In their bedroom, she selected the dress she would wear to greet him, choosing one she knew he particularly loved. The evening seemed to stretch endlessly. Catherine tried to read, attempted to catch up on correspondence, even considered watching a film, but nothing could hold her attention. She found herself checking and rechecking flight tracking information, calculating arrival times, and accounting for customs procedures, and the drive from Heathrow to Kensington Palace. Around midnight, she received a brief text from William. "Missing you terribly tonight. Can't wait to hold you and the children again. This tour has reminded me of what truly matters in life." Catherine read the message several times, her heart swelling with love and anticipation. She typed and retyped her response multiple times before settling on, "We love you more than words can express. Safe travels, my darling. We'll be here waiting." She decided not to reveal that she knew about his early return, wanting to preserve his planned surprise. The fact that he was orchestrating this homecoming, that he'd specifically requested privacy and family time, touched her deeply. It demonstrated that despite his demanding role and sense of duty, his family remained his priority. Sleep proved elusive that night. Catherine lay in their bed, imagining William's surprise when he walked through their door tomorrow evening. She pictured the children's reactions, the chaos and joy that would fill their home, the way their family would feel complete again after 3 long weeks. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Catherine went through her usual routine, helping the children prepare for school, while internally counting down the hours until William's arrival. She was grateful for her morning engagement, which would provide distraction and prevent her from spending the entire day watching clocks. Her visit to the women's shelter was particularly moving. She met with women who were rebuilding their lives after leaving difficult situations, many of whom were single mothers working multiple jobs while caring for their children. Their stories of resilience and determination put her own temporary challenges into perspective. One woman, Maria, was training to become a nurse while raising 3 young children alone. Her ex-husband had been emotionally abusive, and leaving him had meant starting over with nothing but determination and hope. "The hardest part isn't the financial struggle," Maria explained during their conversation. "It's the loneliness, especially in the evenings when the children are asleep and the apartment feels too quiet. You realize how much you took for granted about having someone to share daily life with, even when that relationship wasn't healthy." Catherine nodded, thinking about her own experience of loneliness during William's absence. While her circumstances were vastly different, the fundamental human need for companionship and partnership transcended social boundaries. "How do you find strength during the difficult moments?" Catherine asked. Maria smiled, her eyes lighting up with pride. "I look at my children and remember that I'm showing them what it means to be strong, to make difficult choices for the right reasons, to never settle for less than they deserve. They're my motivation to keep going, to build something better." As Catherine left the shelter, Maria's words resonated deeply with her. She thought about the example she and William were setting for George, Charlotte, and Louis about partnership, duty, and the balance between personal happiness and service to others. The afternoon passed slowly as Catherine attended to correspondence and met with representatives from several of her charitable patronages. Each meeting was important and engaging, but her mind kept drifting to William's impending arrival. She found herself checking her watch frequently, calculating and recalculating flight times and travel logistics. Around 3 o'clock, she received confirmation that the children's school had arranged for early dismissal as requested. George, Charlotte, and Louis would be home by 4, giving her time to prepare them for what they assumed would be a normal evening, but would actually become a celebration of their father's return. Catherine decided to prepare their favorite meal for dinner, shepherd's pie with vegetables from the palace gardens, followed by chocolate pudding that she would make herself rather than leaving it to the kitchen staff. Cooking for her family had always been one of her favorite ways to show love, a normal domestic activity that grounded her in the midst of their extraordinary life. As she worked in the kitchen, Catherine felt a sense of anticipation that reminded her of Christmas mornings when she was young. There is something magical about knowing that joy was coming, about holding on to a secret that would soon bring happiness to the people she loved most. The children arrive home in their typical whirlwind of backpacks, school stories, and requests for snacks. Catherine listened to their accounts of the day while mentally preparing for the evening ahead. She decided to tell them that they were having a special family dinner, without revealing why it was special. "Why is tonight special?" Charlotte asked with the curiosity that made her such an engaging child. "Sometimes we need to celebrate ordinary moments," Catherine replied, which was true even if it wasn't the complete truth. "We don't always need big occasions to make evenings special." George looked at her thoughtfully, his perceptive nature picking up on something different in her demeanor. At 11, he was beginning to understand the complexities of adult life and the value of family time in their demanding schedule. "I like when we have special dinners," Louis announced, completely satisfied with the explanation and excited about any excuse for celebration. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself becoming increasingly nervous and excited. She checked her phone repeatedly for updates, knowing that William's flight was making its way across multiple time zones toward home. The children completed their homework while she put finishing touches on dinner preparations, the whole family working companionably in their shared living spaces. Around 6 o'clock, Catherine received the message she'd been waiting for, landed safely at Heathrow. "We'll be home within the hour. Thank you for arranging this surprise. Cannot wait to see my family." Her heart began racing as she realized William would arrive during their dinner. She quickly set an extra place at the table, trying to make it appear casual while her excitement built to almost overwhelming levels. "Mummy, who is the extra plate for?" Charlotte asked, ever observant. Catherine's mind raced for a plausible explanation. "Oh, I thought we might invite Grandma Carol to join us," she said, improvising quickly. "Is she coming tonight?" George asked, looking pleased at the prospect of seeing his grandmother. "We'll see," Catherine replied vaguely, grateful that her children were too young to catch all the nuances of adult deception, even when that deception was motivated by love. As they sat down to dinner, Catherine struggled to maintain normal conversation while listening for sound from the main entrance of their apartment. Every footstep in the corridor, every distant voice, every mechanical sound made her pulse quicken with anticipation. The children chatted about their day, completely unaware that their world was about to change dramatically for the better. Louis told elaborate stories about his school lunch. Charlotte described a drawing she was planning, and George discussed an upcoming football match with his school team. Catherine participated in the conversation while part of her attention remained focused on the door, wondering exactly how William's arrival would unfold. Would he ring the bell? Would security announce his presence? Would he simply walk in with his key, hoping to surprise everyone? Just as Louis was finishing his main course, Catherine heard footsteps in the main corridor that sounded different from the usual staff movements. Her heart began pounding so loudly she was certain the children would notice, but they remained focused on their dinner conversation. Then came the sound she'd been waiting for, a familiar key turning in their private entrance lock. The sound of the key turning seemed to echo through Catherine's entire being. She felt every muscle in her body tense with anticipation, while simultaneously trying to maintain an expression of casual normalcy for the children, who remained blissfully unaware that their father was about to walk through their door. The children continued their dinner conversation, George explaining something about his mathematics lesson, while Charlotte absently drew patterns in her mashed potatoes with her fork. Louis was attempting to balance a pea on his spoon, completely absorbed in his own little game. Catherine heard the soft thud of luggage being set down in their private entrance hall, followed by the distinctive sound of William's footsteps. After 12 years of marriage, she knew the rhythm of his walk as well as she knew her own heartbeat. Her breath caught in her throat as she heard him moving closer to their dining room. "Mummy, are you all right?" George asked, noticing that she had gone very still. "You look like you're listening to something." Before Catherine could respond, a familiar voice called out from the hallway, "I hope there's enough dinner for one more hungry traveler." The effect on the children was instantaneous and magical. Louis dropped his spoon with a clatter, his eyes widening to enormous blue circles of disbelief and joy. Charlotte's fork froze halfway to her mouth as she processed the impossible reality that Papa's voice was echoing through their home. George sat perfectly still for one heartbeat. Then, his face broke into a grin that seemed to illuminate the entire room. "Papa!" Louis shrieked, launching himself from his chair with such force that it nearly toppled backward. His little legs carried him toward the sound of his father's voice faster than Catherine had ever seen him move. Charlotte was only seconds behind, abandoning her dinner completely as she raced toward the hallway, calling, "Papa, Papa," with breathless excitement. Even George, who had been trying so hard to be mature and responsible during his father's absence, couldn't contain his joy. He jumped up from the table with undignified haste, his careful composure forgotten in the face of overwhelming happiness. Catherine remained seated for just a moment, watching her children disappear around the corner toward their father, listening to the explosion of voices, laughter, and pure joy that erupted from the hallway. She heard William's deep laughter mixing with the children's excited chatter, heard Louis's stream of consciousness questions about airplanes and Australia, heard Charlotte trying to tell him about every drawing she'd created in his absence, heard George's slightly deeper voice expressing relief and happiness in more measured but equally heartfelt terms. Then she stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands, and walked toward her family reunion with a heart so full of love and relief that she felt it might burst from her chest. The scene that greeted her in their entrance hall was everything she had imagined and more. William, still in his travel clothes and looking exhausted but radiant with happiness, was kneeling on the floor with all 3 children wrapped around him in various configurations. Louis had claimed his lap, arms wound tightly around his father's neck, as if he never intended to let go. Charlotte was pressed against his right side, chattering a mile a minute about school and friends and all the things she'd saved up to tell him. George stood slightly apart, but close enough to maintain physical contact, one hand resting on his father's shoulder with a maturity that broke Catherine's heart a little. William looked up as Catherine approached, and the expression in his eyes nearly undid her completely. There was love, relief, gratitude, and something deeper, a recognition that they had weathered this separation together, that their family bond had not only survived, but perhaps grown stronger through the challenge. "Hello, darling," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion and travel fatigue. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes unexpectedly. She had thought she was prepared for this moment, had imagined it so many times over the past day, but the reality of seeing her husband surrounded by their joyful children, of having her family complete again, overwhelmed her in the most wonderful way. "Welcome home," she managed to say, her voice carrying all the love and longing of the past 3 weeks. William gently disentangled himself from the children, though Louis protested and tried to maintain his grip. "Let Papa say hello to Mummy," Charlotte whispered to her little brother, displaying the intuitive wisdom that often surprised Catherine with its depth. William stood and crossed the few steps between them, pulling Catherine into his arms with a fervor that spoke of how much he had missed her. Missed being part of their daily life rather than an observer from thousands of miles away. She breathed in the familiar scent of him, felt the solid warmth of his embrace, and allowed herself to acknowledge just how difficult these weeks had been. "I missed you so much," she whispered against his ear, not caring that the children were watching with fascination and delight. "I missed you more," he replied, holding her tighter. "Every day, every moment. The work was important, but this is everything." "Papa, did you bring us a present from Australia?" Louis asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. William laughed, the sound filling their hallway with warmth and normalcy that had been missing for too long. "I might have found a few things I thought you'd like," he admitted, glancing toward his luggage. "But first, I want to hear everything that's happened while I was gone. And I'm absolutely starving. Something smells incredible. Mummy made shepherd's pie," Charlotte announced proudly. "And she made chocolate pudding herself instead of asking Cook to make it." William's eyes met Catherine's over their daughter's head, and she saw his recognition of all the small gestures she'd made to create a perfect homecoming. "Your mother is remarkable," he said to the children, but his words were meant for her. "I'm the luckiest man in the world." They returned to the dining room in a joyful procession, the children talking over each other in their excitement to share stories and catch up with their father. Catherine quickly prepared William's plate while he settled into his chair, Louis immediately climbing onto his lap despite having his own seat. "Louis, let Papa eat," George said gently, already reassuming his role as responsible older brother. "It's all right," William said, adjusting Louis to a more comfortable position. "I've missed having this little monkey on my lap. Besides, I can eat one-handed. I've had plenty of practice." As they shared their meal, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment settling over her like a warm blanket. The children took turns regaling William with detailed accounts of everything he'd missed. School projects, funny incidents with their pets, Charlotte's latest artistic endeavors, George's improving football skills, Louis's swimming progress. William listened with complete attention, asking questions and responding with genuine interest and pride. "And Mummy was really good while you were gone," Charlotte said with the seriousness of a child who had observed more than adults might expect. "She was a little sad sometimes, but she still helped us with everything and smiled at all her work things." Catherine felt her cheeks warm at her daughter's astute observation. She thought she'd hidden her feelings well, but children were remarkably perceptive about the emotional climates of their homes. William reached across the table and took Catherine's hand, squeezing gently. "Mummy was being very brave and strong. I know it wasn't easy taking care of everything on your own." "We helped too," George added. "We were a team, like Mummy said." "You were indeed," Catherine confirmed, smiling at her eldest son. "The best team I could ask for." After dinner, they moved to the family sitting room, where the children showed William various projects and artwork they'd completed during his absence. Charlotte had prepared a thick folder of drawings, each carefully dated and annotated with explanations of what had inspired her. George presented a science project on renewable energy that he'd worked on independently, clearly hoping to impress his environmentally conscious father. "This is incredible work, George," William said, examining the detailed charts and explanations his son had created. "Your research on solar panel efficiency is really thorough. Have you considered how this might apply to the Earthshot initiatives?" George beamed at his father's praise and the suggestion that his school project might connect to real-world environmental work. At 11, he was beginning to understand how his future role might involve meaningful contributions to causes that mattered. Louis had prepared his own show and tell, which consisted mainly of enthusiastic demonstrations of his improved swimming strokes and several songs he'd learned at school. His presentation was less academic than his siblings' offerings, but his joy and energy were infectious. As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself simply watching her family, absorbing the happiness and completeness that filled their home. William looked tired, The long journey and intense work schedule had clearly taken their toll, but he seemed energized by being surrounded by his children's love and excitement. Around 8 o'clock, they began the bedtime routine that had been Catherine's sole responsibility for the past 3 weeks. Tonight, however, it became a family celebration. William read stories in different character voices, listened to prayers that included grateful thanks for his safe return, and gave the kind of lingering good-night hugs that spoke of how much he'd missed these simple parental pleasures. "Will you still be here in the morning?" Lewis asked as William tucked him in, a hint of worry in his young voice that suggested he feared this might all be a wonderful dream. "I'll be here in the morning, and tomorrow night, and the night after that," William promised solemnly. "No more long trips for quite a while. I plan to be very boring and predictable for the next several weeks." "You're never boring, Papa," Charlotte protested from her doorway, where she'd appeared to claim one more goodnight kiss. After the children were finally settled, William and Catherine found themselves alone together for the first time in 3 weeks. They sat together on their bedroom sofa, Catherine curled against William's side, both of them exhausted but reluctant to end this perfect day. "How did you know I was coming home early?" William asked, absently stroking Catherine's hair. "Sarah told me yesterday about the change in your schedule. I've been practically vibrating with excitement since then, trying not to let the children know." William chuckled softly. "I was so proud of myself for arranging this surprise, and you knew all along. Though I suspect you let me think I was being mysterious." "Your surprise was perfect," Catherine assured him. "Seeing their faces when they heard your voice, watching them race toward you, that was magical. They needed that moment of pure joy." "How were they really?" William asked, his voice becoming more serious. "I know they put on brave faces when we talked on the phone, but I worried about how they were handling the separation." Catherine considered how to answer honestly without causing him guilt about duties he couldn't have avoided. "They missed you terribly, but they were remarkably resilient. George tried very hard to be the man of the house, perhaps too hard sometimes." Charlotte channeled her feelings into her artwork, creating all those drawings she showed you tonight. Lewis was the most direct about his emotions. He asked every day when you were coming home and got excited every time he heard helicopters. William was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "And how were you really?" "Not the official version you gave in our phone calls, but honestly," Catherine hesitated, then decided that honesty was what their marriage needed, especially after this separation. "Lonely," she admitted quietly. "Not just missing you, but feeling the weight of everything falling on my shoulders alone." The children needed extra attention and reassurance. The official duties continued at their usual pace, and I found myself trying to be both parents while maintaining the public expectations of my role. "I'm sorry," William said, his arms tightening around her. "I hated being so far away, especially when I could hear the strain in your voice during our calls. The work was important, but being away from you and the children felt wrong on such a fundamental level." "You were doing what needed to be done," Catherine replied. "I understood that intellectually. Emotionally, though, I just wanted my partner back." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the experiences of the past 3 weeks and appreciating the simple pleasure of being physically close again. Catherine felt the tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders for weeks beginning to finally release. "The climate negotiations were successful," William said eventually. "We achieved agreements that could have real impact on carbon emissions across the Commonwealth nations. But every achievement felt hollow because I couldn't share it with you immediately, couldn't celebrate with the person whose opinion matters most to me." Catherine turned to look at his face, seeing the exhaustion and satisfaction of important work completed, but also the relief of someone who had returned to where he belonged. "I'm so proud of what you accomplished. The children are too, even if they don't fully understand the scope of it yet. But I'm mostly just grateful to have you home." "I've been thinking during the flight about balance," William continued, "about how to fulfill my responsibilities without sacrificing these precious years while the children are young, while our family needs both parents present and engaged. Catherine felt a surge of hope at his words. The challenge of balancing royal duty with family life was one they'd navigated since their marriage, but each new phase of their lives required fresh consideration and compromise. "What conclusions did you reach?" she asked. "That some opportunities might need to be delegated or postponed, that the institution is strong enough to handle more strategic choices about where my personal presence is absolutely necessary versus where other representatives might suffice." Catherine smiled, feeling deeply loved by his willingness to examine and adjust his approach. "The children and I will always support your important work, but knowing you're also committed to being present for family life makes everything more manageable." As they finally prepared for bed, Catherine realized that William's return had restored more than just family completeness. It had renewed her confidence in their partnership, in their ability to weather the unique challenges of their life together, and in their shared commitment to putting family at the center of everything else they built. The following morning brought a sense of normalcy that Catherine hadn't experienced in weeks. She woke naturally, without the aid of an alarm, to find William already awake beside her, simply watching her with a soft expression that had melted her heart since their university days. The early morning light filtering through their bedroom curtains created patterns across his face, highlighting the tired lines around his eyes that spoke of his demanding schedule, but also the contentment that came from being exactly where he belonged. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I was beginning to think I'd dreamed all of this." Catherine smiled, stretching luxuriously in the warmth of their bed, savoring this simple pleasure of waking up beside her husband after 3 weeks of sleeping alone. "If this is a dream, I don't ever want to wake up." They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the familiar sounds of Kensington Palace coming to life around them. In the distance, they could hear the gentle sounds of the household staff beginning their daily routines, but their private apartment remained peaceful and quiet. "What time is it?" Catherine asked, though she found herself reluctant to return to the structured world of royal schedules and obligations. William glanced at his watch. "Just past 7. The children won't be up for another 30 minutes or so." He turned back to her with a mischievous smile. "That means we have time for proper coffee and perhaps a few minutes to ourselves before the chaos begins." Catherine laughed softly. "You've been gone for 3 weeks, and you're already calling our children's morning energy chaos? That's not very diplomatic of you, Your Royal Highness." "Ah, but it's the most wonderful kind of chaos," William replied, leaning over to kiss her gently. "The kind I miss desperately every single morning I was away." As if summoned by their conversation, they heard the patter of small feet in the corridor, followed by Louis's voice calling out, "Papa, are you really here? Or was yesterday a really good dream?" William chuckled and called back, "I'm really here, little man. Come and see for yourself." Their bedroom door opened cautiously, and Louis peered around the frame, his hair sticking up at impossible angles, and his favorite teddy bear clutched tightly in his arms. When he saw William sitting up in bed, his face broke into a grin of pure delight. "Papa!" he exclaimed, abandoning all pretense of quiet morning behavior as he raced across the room and launched himself onto the bed. "You're still here. Did you think I might disappear in the night?" William asked, gathering his youngest son into a warm embrace. "Maybe," Louis admitted honestly. "Sometimes when I dream really good things, they go away when I wake up." Catherine felt her heart clench at the wisdom hidden in her 5-year-old's words. Children experienced loss and separation differently than adults, but no less deeply. Louis's fear that his father's return might vanish revealed how much the 3-week separation had affected him. "Well, I can promise you that I'm completely real and not going anywhere for a very long time," William said seriously. "In fact, I was thinking we might spend the entire day together as a family." "Would you like that?" Louis nodded enthusiastically, then tilted his head with curiosity. "Don't you have work today?" "You always have work." Catherine, and William exchanged glances over Lewis's head. Their son's observation was both accurate and heartbreaking. The demands of royal life meant that completely unscheduled family days were rare treasures. But William's early return had created an unexpected opportunity for exactly that kind of precious time together. "Today, my most important job is being Papa," William replied. "Everything else can wait." Charlotte appeared in the doorway next, moving more sedately than her younger brother, but with equally obvious joy at seeing her father still present. She climbed onto the bed more carefully, settling herself between her parents with the satisfied air of someone whose world had been restored to proper order. "Good morning, Papa," she said formally, then broke into giggles at her own seriousness. "I'm so happy you're home." "Good morning, my artistic princess," William replied, using the pet name that always made Charlotte beam with pride. "I hope you've saved time in your busy schedule today to show me all the artwork you've created recently." "I have 17 new drawings since you left," Charlotte announced with precision. "And I started a painting, but it's not finished yet." George appeared last, as Catherine had expected. At 11, he was becoming more conscious of personal space and privacy, less likely to burst into his parents' bedroom with abandon. He knocked gently on the doorframe and waited for permission to enter. "Come in, sweetheart," Catherine called. "We're having an impromptu family meeting in bed." George smiled and approached more cautiously than his siblings, but his relief at seeing William was evident in his expression. "Good morning, Papa. How are you feeling after your long journey?" William was struck, not for the first time, by George's thoughtful maturity. "I'm feeling much better now that I'm home with my family. A bit tired still, but very happy. Would you like some tea?" George offered, displaying the consideration that made Catherine so proud of the young man he was becoming. "I know how to make it properly now." "That's very thoughtful of you," William replied. "But this morning, I think we should let the kitchen staff handle breakfast while we have family time. How does that sound?" George nodded, settling himself on the edge of the bed with his siblings. For a few precious minutes, the five of them simply existed together in their private space, sharing gentle conversation and quiet laughter that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Catherine watched William with their children and felt a deep sense of completeness settling over their home. This was what had been missing during his absence, not just an extra adult to share responsibilities, but the particular energy and balance that came from having both parents present and engaged. "What shall we do today?" William asked the children. "Since I don't have any official duties, we could do anything you'd like." "Could we go to the park?" Lewis suggested immediately. "The one with the big playground and the ducks." "Could we have a picnic?" Charlotte added, her eyes lighting up with possibility. "We could pack lunch and eat outside like a real adventure." George considered more thoughtfully. "Could we visit the stables? I've been working on my writing, and I'd like to show you how much I've improved." Catherine smiled at the different requests that so perfectly reflected each child's personality. Lewis's desire for active play, Charlotte's love of special experiences, and George's wish to share his accomplishments with his father. "Why don't we do all of those things?" William suggested. "We could start with breakfast together, then visit the stables so George can show off his writing skills, pack a picnic lunch to take to the park, and spend the afternoon playing and feeding the ducks." The children's excitement was immediate and infectious. They began talking over each other, planning details, and making suggestions with the enthusiasm that only children could bring to a spontaneous adventure. "Shall we get dressed and start this perfect day?" Catherine suggested, laughing at the chaos of voices and ideas surrounding them. As the children dispersed to their rooms to get ready, William caught Catherine's hand before she could rise from bed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked, though she suspected she knew what he meant. "For holding everything together while I was away. For making this homecoming so perfect. For understanding why I had to go, even when it was difficult for all of you." Catherine leaned down to kiss him softly. "You don't need to thank me for loving you and our children, but I appreciate hearing that you noticed how hard we all work to keep things running smoothly." I noticed everything, William said seriously. The way you managed your own duties while taking on mine, how you supported the children emotionally while dealing with your own feelings, the grace you showed in all your public appearances. You were remarkable. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how important it was to have her efforts acknowledged and appreciated. Partnership means we support each other through everything, she replied. When you're away serving the Commonwealth, I hold things together at home. When I need to travel for my own commitments, you do the same. That's how we make this impossible life work. William nodded, understanding the deeper conversation they were having about balance, support, and the unique challenges of their royal marriage. I want to do better at making sure those separations are truly necessary, not just convenient for scheduling. And I want to do better at asking for help when I need it, instead of trying to handle everything alone, Catherine added. They heard Louis calling from down the hall. Are we having breakfast now? I'm getting very hungry. Catherine and William laughed, the moment of serious conversation giving way to the immediate demands of family life. They dressed quickly and joined their children for what turned out to be the most relaxed family breakfast they'd shared in months. The kitchen staff had prepared all of the children's favorites, and the family dining room filled with the comfortable chatter of a family catching up after separation. William listened with genuine interest as each child shared updates about school, friends, and activities. Catherine found herself able to truly relax for the first time in weeks, no longer carrying the full weight of family management on her own shoulders. After breakfast, they made their way to the palace stables, where George proudly demonstrated his improved riding skills. William watched with evident pride as his son guided his pony through a series of exercises with growing confidence and control. You've made tremendous progress, William told George sincerely. Your posture is excellent, and you're communicating beautifully with Pepper. George beamed at the praise, sitting even straighter in his saddle. Catherine could see how much her eldest son had missed his father's attention and approval, how important it was for him to share his achievements with the parent he looked up to most. Charlotte and Louis took turns on the gentler ponies, with William providing patient instruction and encouragement. Louis giggled delightedly as his pony walked slowly around the ring, while Charlotte approached her ride with artistic concentration, already planning how she would draw this experience later. From the stables, they returned to their private apartment to pack the promised picnic lunch. Catherine had asked the kitchen to prepare simple foods that could be eaten outdoors: sandwiches, fruit, biscuits, and thermoses of hot chocolate for the children. Can we bring bread for the ducks? Charlotte asked as they gathered their supplies. Already packed, Catherine replied, producing a bag of appropriate duck food. Though we should remember that too much bread isn't good for them. Mummy thinks about everything, Louis observed with 5-year-old admiration. That's one of the many reasons I married her, William agreed, winking at Catherine over Louis's head. The drive to their chosen park was filled with animated conversation and laughter. William sat in the back seat between Charlotte and Louis, listening to their ongoing commentary about everything they passed. George, who had claimed the front passenger seat, acted as tour guide, pointing out changes and improvements that had occurred during William's absence. At the park, they found a perfect spot beneath an ancient oak tree that provided both shade and a clear view of the playground and pond. Catherine spread the picnic blanket while William helped the children organize their lunch and plan their afternoon activities. What followed were several hours of the most normal, precious family time they'd experienced in months. William pushed Louis on the swings until his arms ached, built elaborate sand castles with Charlotte in the playground sandbox, and played football with George on the park's open field. Catherine found herself able to simply enjoy watching her family together, taking photos to capture moments she knew she would treasure for years to come. The afternoon flew by in a blur of laughter, games, and gentle conversation. They fed the ducks at the pond, with Louis providing a running commentary on each bird's personality and Charlotte sketching quick portraits of the most interesting specimens. George practiced his photography skills with Catherine's phone, carefully composing shots of his family enjoying their perfect day. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the park in golden autumn light, they packed up their picnic supplies and prepared to return home. The children were tired but happy, full of fresh air and family time that had recharged their spirits completely. This was the best day, Charlotte announced from her car seat as they drove back to Kensington Palace. Even better than Christmas morning. Better than birthdays, too, Louis added sleepily, his head beginning to nod as the motion of the car and the day's activities caught up with him. It was a perfect day, George agreed, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose family felt complete again. That evening, as they settled into their familiar bedtime routines, Catherine reflected on how quickly their family dynamics had shifted back to normal. William's presence had immediately restored a sense of balance and completeness that made everything feel easier and more joyful. As they tucked each child into bed, Catherine noticed how relaxed and content they all seemed. The tension and worry that had characterized the past 3 weeks had dissolved completely, replaced by the security that came from having both parents present and engaged. "Will you be here tomorrow, too?" Louis asked sleepily as William kissed him goodnight. "I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and for many, many days to come," William promised. "No more long trips for quite a while." "Good," Louis mumbled, already halfway to sleep. "I like it better when our family is all together." After the children were asleep, William and Catherine sat together in their private sitting room, sharing a quiet cup of tea and reflecting on their perfect family day. "Thank you for today," Catherine said softly, "for choosing to spend it with us instead of catching up on work or official duties. Today reminded me why everything else matters," William replied. "The work, the travel, the public service, it's all meaningful because it serves a purpose larger than ourselves. But this, our family, our children's happiness, this is what gives everything else its real importance." Catherine curled up beside him on the sofa, feeling more peaceful and content than she had in weeks. William's arm around her shoulders felt like coming home, and she knew that whatever challenges their unique life might bring in the future, they would face them together as partners and as a family. "I love you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I love you too," he replied, holding her closer, more than words could ever express. Outside their window, London sparkled in the evening darkness, millions of people going about their own lives and facing their own challenges. But inside their private apartment at Kensington Palace, a family had been reunited, love had been reaffirmed, and the future stretched ahead with renewed promise and possibility.